put yeah. Thank you so much again. It's really my pleasure, delightful, and you know, I'm really honored. I feel honored by this invitation and by the opportunity to sort of discuss our work with you. So there you go, right? So, yes. And Alice, thank you. You all know Alice, you know that she's very biased. So anyway, now you're going to get to know me for real. But my hope for today is, of course, is to really address your needs. So I would like to keep this as interactive as we can and also open up for discussion. So what I'm going to go with through the highlights of the article to begin with. But I want you to, and I'm going to basically walk you through all the sections of the study. And then I'm going to stop at each section to really ask for your questions that you might have. Still, if at any point you have questions outside the question time, you're always welcome. Just feel free to unmute yourself or send your comment through the chat. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat. And, you know, we are going to go for it. So hopefully by the end, you will be able to appraise the use of reporting guidelines for educational scholarship and formulate potential applications of reporting guidelines to your scholarly work. Because I think this is what, you know, what is at the core of this work. So let me ask you, stop here and ask you first, and feel free to use the chat or just unmute yourself. How many of you are familiar with reporting guidelines? For this question, send a quick yes or no through the chat. Are you familiar with reporting guidelines? Yes, no. Quick yes. Good. I see a yes.
Well, that's Wendy, the librarian. So
I know, yeah. See, that's a very biased. Yes, that's okay. Anyone else? No, this is my first. Great. Yes, yes, not yet fully. No, okay. Okay, not fully. Great. So so I'm glad we are doing this so that you sort of know how to use them. So my next question is, what are reporting guidelines? Any guess? Anyone who would like to? Except for Wendy is not allowed. Yeah, Wendy's not allowed to.
Anybody want to take a chance at reporting guidelines?
What are reporting guidelines? From what you know, you might think.
What might give you the best chance of success at publishing?
Okay, that's a good point. So that's a good point. So what you're saying is that reporting guidelines help for publication. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What else? The other question is, what is the value? And I think you are sort of addressing a value too. Anything else about reporting guidelines? But I'm glad you brought the publication in. So reporting guidelines, you clearly and nicely said, assist the authors in conducting and describing their research in alignment with evidence-based and expert-determined standards. What happened, as you all know, is sometimes well-qualified principles, right, for carrying out specific study designs may be overlooked, we don't realize, or we also have incomplete reportings that can impede readers' ability to replicate interventions and can stymie knowledge synthesis, such as, for example, meta-analysis, right? So the reporting guidelines really help us make sure that we address everything that we need to address based on our design in a manuscript and for dissemination, right? And I would even suggest that you even look at the reporting guidelines even before starting, because they really help with the study design too, with making sure that you are using all the principles and following all the criteria that you use as you develop your study, right? And luckily, we do have a repository of reporting guidelines, which is the Equator. The Equator is a registry of reporting guidelines in health sciences. So you will see a lot of reporting guidelines for example, clinical trials. And you will also now, I can probably say that you will see in DoCTRINE, the reporting guidelines that I will introduce you today, also index, because we did apply and we were sort of accepted. others reporting guidelines that you might be probably familiar or not are the CONSOR, for example, for randomized trials, the PRISMA for conducting systematic review. I have to say there's also one that is called the GRID, that basically what those guidelines describe are evidence-based practice, educational interventions, and teaching interventions.
Could you say that again? What is that called?
It's called GREET.
Oh, GRID?
GREET. Yeah, GRID. So these are for educational interventions and practice. And you know, if you read our article, you'll see that we mentioned this, because when we saw them, we said, okay, how are ours different than what these authors did? And what is missing, the GRID is more for practice. What is missing is the scholarly piece of the teaching intervention or the innovation, which is what we brought in. That makes sense? So hopefully now you know, and I would suggest that after this, you sort of review the equations network and you'll see that there's a lot. There's also, for example, reporting guidelines for QI studies, quality improvement, for observational studies. There's a lot. For qualitative,
Are all those in Equator also?
Yes, for qualitative research too. There's another one for qualitative research studies. There's a lot, yeah. I mean, it's impressive, the list that you have there. What you have to do is, once you know what your design is, I would suggest that you go search, and then, you know, Wendy can help you with this too. And then you identify the sort of reporting guidelines that address your research design. But what we noticed is there were not specific reporting guidelines for innovation in education types of project. And as you know, I don't know if you know, but the field is now even considering innovations in education as a new genre, right? We use research, of course, methods to address innovations in education, but they have their own sort of also they're also tweaked to it, right? So there was no reporting guidelines for innovations in education. And this is what we tried to do. And specifically, I'm going to clarify, our innovations in educations are really focused on curricular interventions. And I'm going to come back, you're going to see that I'm going to come back to it. So what we did with a group of colleagues, most of them are involved in MetaPortal, and actually we use MetaPortal submission, so that you see that's sort of one of the limitations. We really sort of focus more on MetaPortal type of publications, right? But I had a privilege to work with a wonderful team. And so we came out with these reporting guidelines, what we sort of titled DoCTRINE, that stands for Defined Criteria to Report Innovations in Education. And this is what this effort did. So I'm going to walk you through what we did, and then, you know, we're going to discuss it throughout. The first thing that I want to bring your attention to is, of course, we use theoretical frameworks to sort of conduct this study. And the two theoretical frameworks that we use are Keynes' contemporary framework, validity framework. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but this is the validity framework that the field is now, the medical education field in particular, is embracing. So we use Keynes' validity stages to conduct our study and develop our guidelines. And you will see the stages clearly laid out in our steps. And we also use guidelines that were actually developed by a group of scholars from the Equators Network. They have a nice article, and you will have the slides, so you will have all these references at the end too, in which, you know, they basically describe the steps that authors should follow to develop reporting guidelines. Evidence-based, well-done reporting guidelines. And so we use their steps too. So these two frameworks, and here we are, came out in these 21 steps, you could see. So it was a pretty thorough, exhausting, but wonderful and fun sort of study to conduct. And I'm going to mention each of them so that you have an idea what it takes to really develop a sort of a sound reporting guidelines. So the states are consistent with Keynes' validity framework, right? And the steps describe also actions that are consistent with the validity state and also are sort of suggested by the group of the equators, by the scholars from the equators. So first, we develop the guidelines. The way we develop the guidelines is first, as I said before, we identify the need for these reporting guidelines, really focus on innovations in education. So we look at the equators and they were not something, the closer was the grid, it was for teaching practices, but it didn't have the scholarly piece of it, right? So we did an extensive review of the literature on existing guidelines for writing innovations and educations, and as well as existing reporting guidelines. And I have to also acknowledge our librarians' help. We pulled from all our librarians because we were from different institutions too, and they did a phenomenal job at helping us sort of narrow things down, as they always do. We draft preliminary guidelines based on our observations of this literature. Then what we did is multiple reviews of preliminary set of guidelines by the study team until we reached consensus on a final draft. Then what we did is we execute a Delphi study. I don't know how many of you are familiar with a Delphi study, but this is a consensus technique that basically involves in recruiting experts. And so we send them our guidelines for them to rate the extent to which they were necessary for a reporting guidelines for education innovations, and also give us any feedback on the items, wording, and stuff like that. So when we did, following the Delphi techniques, we did 2 rounds. You need at least 2 rounds. And we recruited 14 experts. And these were all leaders in medical education, especially they were authors and, you know, very well published sort of scholars in the field, specifically innovations in education. So
Maria, I just want to mention,
yes.
if anybody is not familiar with what a Delphi study is on this call, there is a wonderful academic medicine last page on that I'll put into the chat just to make sure everybody's on the page, because this is a very detailed process to do a Delphi study, pick
Yes.
your experts, and this was a very important step of what they did for their project.
Yeah, and you can also, in the article, you see the original, we did a modified Delphi study, basically because we modify some things of the rigorous Delphi technique. And, you know, we sort of follow a reference, a medical education reference, in which it does a nice job at describing the different consensus methodologies. One of which is the Delphi study. So you can also refer to that article. But basically is recruiting experts for them to review your instrument and then rate whatever, you know, review them based on what you want. Typically, you want them to rate the importance of the item in the instrument, and then also you ask for qualitative sort of comments in terms of, you know, how to better word the items or not. So based on that, we did 1 round, we received all their feedback, we sort of modified the guidelines based on their feedback, then we send them back the new modified guidelines for them to review it again. And the way you do this is basically I'm going to go back to how we analyze this, right? I'm going to now follow up, but what we did is we set up an agreement threshold among the experts, and once we read that agreement level for each item, we stop the Delphi technique. That's what we did too, because we were able to really came out with the final set of guidelines after the 2nd round with the experts. So then what we did is we developed based on that Delphi study with the expert, and that's important because what you are doing is asking experts in the field to really weigh in your instrument and help develop your instrument. So what we did is we developed after that set of Delphi rounds, we developed an instrument. We came up with an instrument that was ready to be tested. And so we started the pilot testing, the testing sort of phase. And the way we did that was first, we applied the checklist that we have at that time to 3 publications by each member of the study team. And these were meta-portal publications. So then we discussed the results from the application, from those publications by the team. We reviewed the instrument once again based on that. Then what we did is we conduct cognitive interviews with 6 medical educators for further testing and input with 4 medical educations. What you do is cognitive interviews is another technique that we use for survey design, for example, or for instrument designs. What you do in a cognitive interview is you ask, there are 2 different approaches, but basically what we did is we asked these medical educators to go over a publication using the rubric or the checklist, the guidelines at the same time, and verbalizing, thinking aloud for us how they were sort of completing the checklist, right? And so that's what the cognitive interview technique is. You could either ask the participants to think aloud and verbalize how they are thinking, or you can even ask questions, direct questions, right? Probing for them to answer your questions while they're completing the instrument, right? So here we did, basically we asked them to think aloud. And then of course we ask them further questions as needed as they were thinking aloud, right? And what they do is typically they do, okay, so now I'm seeing whether the introduction has or whether the method has all the number of participants. Let me see, I'm reading, I don't see the number of participants per se, so right? So what you do as interviewers, you sort of keep track of how the participant is completing the instrument. And that gave us a lot of insights and really allow us to identify items that were still not that clear. So after those cognitive interviews, we did a new revision of the instrument. Based on that, basically wording, it was more wording issues that we sort of changed. Then we test the guidelines, which is a different sort of state already, right? The way we test the guidelines is we apply this new sort of revised version of the instrument to 6 publications by 6 different medical educators. We review the results from their publications, followed by revisions. We further edit the wording based on the results, and we finally come out with a finalist checklist. So the final checklist is a checklist of 19 items, as you can see from the article, right? And then, since we sort of didn't give up that easily, we really wanted to see if we could implement the guidelines, which is the very last validity step, right? Which is hard to get. So we did some studies, and there, and as you see, it's probably not the most robust phase, but what we did is we implement the checklist with actual submissions to the meta portal. And we sort of use the checklist at the screening phase of the submission. So Alice sort of mentioned a little bit what happened when you submit a meta portal. If you're not familiar, I'm gonna sort of walk you again. So what happened when you submit to meta portal, the first thing that you get is a screening letter from the staff. So basically, and everyone gets it, every author gets it, trust me. So what this phase is what the staff do is they basically review that the submissions has all the elements that needs to have, and it's sort of in alignment with the copyrights issues, and so it's more procedural. Has the appendices that right, or at least the appendices are there. So it's more procedural, right? And so that's what we call screening. And so what we did in this case, so typically what the staff, what the members of the staff do is they send the screening letter to the authors, then the authors sort of address the staff issues, then they send it back, and then is when the staff put it in, sort of start putting it in queue for review. And that's where, you know, the associate editors, we come in, we review it just to say whether or not it's ready for review based on some criteria that we have, which is the same criteria that we ask authors to address. Then once we give the approval for peer review, that's when we send it out to our reviewers, and we are always searching for new reviewers. So you want to become my reviewer, you're very welcome, and please do so that. And then typically, you know, after the reviews, typically the reviews go at least 2 rounds of reviews. But what we did in this case, so we send the checklist to a group of authors together with the screening letter. That's what we did. And I'm going to tell you just to see whether, you know, the screening was helpful in any way. So, and then we apply the checklist also to the submitted manuscript by the actual authors, and we review the results for the implementation. So now I'm going to walk you through the results of each step. But before I do that, any questions on these steps? And I can put them back if you want.
Put them back. Any questions on all these steps? This is a lot of steps, Maria.
It's a lot. It's really, it's not easy, right? Writing, because
what was the timing on this? How long did this whole process take that you just said?
I think it took a year or so.
And when in the first step here of highlighting the guidelines, that was 3 publications by each member of the study team. So that was a study team. I'm sorry, over here, when you did the next step after the pilot, 6 publications. So they each did 6, not 1. Am I correct?
Yeah, you're correct. No, we were looking for, you know, really the more the better, right? Because I have to say, I'm going to go quick. I'm going to present you the highlights of each step, but we did have one of our team members is a statistician. So he did a phenomenal job with, you know, the power that we needed, the analysis of the numbers that we needed, all this sort of tests that he did. In fact, you know, if you read the article, you will see that we did pretty sophisticated statistics, but, you know, I'm not the statistician one. So anyway, yeah, so that's why we try to make them sound so that we could ended up, you know, in the equators. And also, most important, we wanted to make sure that we produce something that was going to be useful for the whole field and reliable. And again, one thing that I should say, the checklist look for present or absence of each item. It does not get into quality. If you look at the reporting guidelines that are on the equators, there are some that are really focusing on quality. We did not do that. We are not talking about the quality of the submission. Basically, what elements needs to be present in a sound report of innovations in education. That makes sense?
I'm glad you clarified that, because my question was there consideration for quality checklists like Mirsky and Newcastle, Ottawa?
No. So Mirsky, I'm glad you brought up Mirsky is another one that is a measure that you probably are familiar from the journal. You know, it's the one that most medical education research sort of articles refer to, because these are guidelines that actually are for the quality of medical education research. It's an instrument that measures the quality. Yeah, Wendy, I have to say, at the beginning where we are developing, right, that's why you see so back and forth. I think it was almost 2 years, but we were meeting weekly. So it was not, and I think we were dreaming with the items at some point, right? We discussed a lot. We started a version with quality, but it was getting way too much. So we decided to start with present or absent, just because it was the first time that we were all doing this kind of work too. And it's like any validity also work, right? It takes a lot of work. So yeah, but that's an important distinction. Any other questions on the methods before I show you the highlights?
Anybody?
I think I will continue, and then of course we can bring questions until the end. So these are the highlights of the first stages, right? Developing, piloting, and testing. So the initial checklist including 24, and the items are categorized into 5 components, with our introduction, curriculum development, curriculum implementation, results, and discussions. Which are basically the sections of a manuscript, and especially if you look into the MEDED portal manuscript, those are the sections of the MEDED portal manuscript. After the 2 modified Delphi rounds, we kept the items that achieve our predetermined threats goal of 70% of agreement and made nominal edits to item wording. We got a lot of feedback from better ways to word the items through the experts. The modified Delphi study process resulted in an average of 88% consensus on items in round 1 and 86% consensus in round 2. So as you see, we have pretty high agreement among the experts in, with the items of the checklist, which is good and is what you should be pursuing in a Delphi study. By the end of this stage 1, the item consisted of 20 items, right? By the when we finish develop, what we call the development. Then based on the cognitive interviews that I referred to in stage 2, we rewarded again more items for clarity. In stage 3, we calculated overall integrated agreement to be 0.91 with item level agreement ranging from 0.64 to 1, and the final checklist. So that was that we had a good rate of agreement. These are the 6 people that actually rate all these 6 publications. And the final checklist including 19 items. And those are the items that you see today in the current version of the checklist. Make sense? Any questions about these 3 phases? And you have all the statistics again and report on in the article. No questions. So this is, this was our best attempt. This is very hard, but this is where we still need probably to work more. And now that they're in the equator, we can probably do more. So what we try is we try to use the guidelines for actual publications to MEDED portal. So we look at a group of 180 manuscripts that were submitted to MEDED portal during the study time. So one of the things we did different, and we look at different things here. So you will have to follow with me too here, right? So one of the things that we did is we sort of divide this group of authors into 2 groups. Intervention group, 53 submissions, and control group, 55. The way we sort of randomize in the authors is by month, right? With some months were part of the intervention, some months were part of the control. And what we mean by intervention is that, if you remember what I said before, what we did with the intervention group is, together with the screening letter, which is that initial letter that the staff sends to the author with, procedural things to address, we also add the checklist. And we told the authors, here is a checklist we are studying. Of course, we have to do all the study consent. See, if you use it as you prepare your submission for, your work for resubmission. So that's basically what this intervention consisted of, okay? On the other hand, we look at, the total score distribution for the guidelines in all these 108 manuscripts, right? And we saw that the mean score for that distribution was 16.4 out of 19 items. That also gave us an idea of what, the sample of a manuscript that we were looking at. And as you see, pretty much the authors to MEDED portal sort of addressed a lot of the items of the, just from the get-go, right? Of the checklist, right? Then we also look at because then the other thing that we do is from these 180, we follow these submissions and we see how many were accepted and how many were rejected. And as you see, 69 were accepted and 39 were rejected. So what we did is we calculate the total score of the guidelines at the post-screening stage. This is basically once the authors sort of submit their work after going through the staff screening letter, right? And we noticed that mean total score for the accepted submissions was higher than for the rejected submission. So meaning that the authors who were accepted have more items than the authors that were rejected after the post-screening phase, meaning that's it, once these submissions were back from the staff comments. Does that make sense? And really get ready for review. Does that make sense? So that's what we notice.
So just being clear, in order to go out for review, it has to pass that first editor review.
It has to pass it. So in order for go to review, these are the things. First of all, there's a screening done by the staff. It has to pass that. And that is always done. Every submission goes back from the staff to the authors to address some procedural stuff. These are copyright things,
logistics,
all. So that's what we call the post-screening phase, is when they are back from that screening letter, right? The authors address the staff concerns, and then they are started to be positioned for the review. Yeah, because then what happened is after that post-screening stage, this is when it comes to, it's assigned to an associate editor. We do a first screening just to make sure that it has the criteria that needs to have before going into peer review. And then if we tell the staff this is ready for peer review, the staff goes back and send it out.
But you use the doctrine at that associate editor level.
No, we used before, even way before. We use the DoCTRINE at the staff level.
Really? Okay.
Really, not even at the associate editor. No, even at the beginning, at the pre-screening stage.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, even at the pre-screening stage. We can't do that later. Anyway, that's what we did here, right? At the pre-screening stage. So this was just, so meaning that this is just the first thing, because it's when because we thought we look at it for that, because the emphasis is not that matter, is not on quality, but more on present or absent of each sort of a item. That's another thing that honestly, when the staff sends us to the associate editors, they ask us to double check that. That's what we also double check. But the staff does that too. So we did it at the first. What we notice is that this difference between the accepted submissions and rejected submissions in terms of how they were performing on the guidelines had an effect size of 0.6. So meaning that it was a pretty moderate effect size. Now, we look into still comparing the accepted versus rejected. We wanted to see, we could see a trend of which were the items that were missing, right? What we found is that, yes, indeed, there were 2 items and that was related to the results and discussion that were significantly higher for accepting submissions than rejected submission. I have to say, I'm going to come back to this, but this was not surprising for the associate editors, because these are the two sections of the meta-portal submission that authors tend to struggle the most. So now, when we went back to the intervention and control group, I have to report that we couldn't find any difference between the submissions that, you know, were given the checklist at the screening phase versus the submissions that were not given the checklist at the screening phase. So of course we don't know whether the authors use this or not, but you know, there were no really significant findings. Significant, we can say a trend, but there was no significant findings there. So this is where there's more food for us to keep testing. So any questions about the results?
Are you going to tell us those two things that were missing?
Yeah,
No.
the two things that were missing were the results and the discussion.
No, but any aspect of the results and discussion, or just that's where the weakness was?
That's where the weakness was.
Okay.
That's where in general where they perform worst, meaning that, you know, the items of those sections were not well addressed. I have to say, I can say that from the discussion, the reflective critique was a big one. And also the limitations were not there. So I see a question from Karen. Yeah.
I'm sorry if you said this already, and I did read the article, but my question is, so when you're saying, I'm curious, so I know for this particular study, obviously you're looking at the guidelines and how much, you know, was on the guidelines between the different groups, accepted and rejected. The submissions, or the ones that you reviewed for the actual study, those authors, they weren't given though these guidelines, were they? And they don't currently exist in MedEd portal
No.
right? Am I correct
Right.
in saying that? Okay, that's what I just wanted.
You're right. No, you're right. The thing
Okay.
is that we did a pilot with these 53 authors of the intervention group, and we did send them the checklist at the screening, after the screening, at the screening phase. But we couldn't see any difference from the control group. That makes sense.
Yeah, and I might be jumping the gun here, obviously, but like, so then do you guys plan on just making this a part of the author instructions, I guess, per se, for MedEd portal? I'm assuming Grace would do that, you know, to say, you know.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
already there. I believe it's it's already in the we have an author center, and
Right.
we can keep talking about this, right? Because this is one, really, this study was conceived because, as you know, I'm very biased. First of all, full disclosure, I'm very biased with MedEd portal since it started. I've been involved in the journal since it was not a journal, as a reviewer since 2005. So I've been growing. Alice too. Alice is a mentor. I'm a mentor too. I've been growing with the journal. I cannot be more proud of where the journal is now, right? And one of the, I firmly believe that one of the distinct characteristic of that journal is that we always work with the authors as much as we can, because we want them to succeed and we want them to show their scholarly work.
I just want to, is every article in MedEd portal considered an innovation? Because like in the academic medicine journal, only certain articles are innovation.
That's an excellent point. Yes, I think it is, because as you know, our articles are interventions, right?
Right.
Educational innovation. And this is one thing that, you know, one limitation. In fact, you know, when we go to sort of a limitations, right? One of the things is that, of course, this was focus on MedEd portal submissions, and also in particularly because MedEd portal has different type of innovations. We pilot these guidelines with curriculum interventions.
Only. I
Okay.
see. And you didn't do any of the innovation articles in academic medicine?
No, and this is one thing that, you know, if you look at the discussion, and let me go quickly through the discussion items, and then, you know, we open it up. So, of course, we have high levels of integrated agreement at the item level and overall, demonstrating the reliability of the doctrine guidelines. And I mean, I think we can say, and we didn't, in fact, it was probably, yeah, 2 years for sure. But, you know, we can say that, you know, we were not going to put it out until we were convinced. And of course, it went through academic medicine reviewers, which, as you know, they're not that easy either. But we also showed that mean scores of accepted submission were significantly higher than those of rejecting, suggesting that, you know, understanding the scholarly writing or the quality of curriculum design is important for those who want to be successful in publication. As I said, the results and discussions tend to be the more difficult part, and we know by our experience that those tends to be the more difficult part. And also this sort of reflects the importance of the evaluation component. And, you know, that's the area, the evaluation component is the area where the authors in MetaPortal find more challenging. Because what happens is teachers tend to deliver their teaching interventions and really don't think about them in a scholarly way. They don't think about evaluating them, which is the first step to start thinking about it scholarly too, right? So then what they do is they want to publish and they go backwards, right? And what happens is when things are not aligned, methodologically aligned from the get-go, it's very hard to push it, right? And so this one, you know, results and discussions are where our authors really struggle the more. This is mostly the case because there was not a good evaluation process in place from the get-go, even if we are talking about learners' reactions, right? For example, in the world of faculty development, we have a lot of submissions of people that deliver workshops at national meetings. When I see these admissions, I know that we will have to work hard on the evaluation, because what happens is typically these authors don't even have evaluations from those workshops, or they are the general evaluations of the conferences that really don't match at all the objectives of the workshops. So, you know, I'm like, okay, we gotta make this sense of this scholarly, right? So as good educators, if you're thinking about publishing in MetaPortal, just make sure that all your curriculum components are well aligned. Your introduction, you do a good literature review, you sort of place your intervention in the field, you then do the methods. The methods of intervention are consistent with the methods that are consistent, are based, first of all, you have clear learning objectives, following the SMART program for writing learning objectives. Those method of interventions are consistent with those learning objectives, as well as the evaluation has to be aligned and consistent. Well, everything is aligned, then it's easy for you to really submit and write it up for MetaPortal, for example, or for an innovations report in academic medicine. But for that, you need a lot of data and really high level sort of evaluation data. In MetaPortal, we are still fine with the reactions, but we are asking for learning too as much as you can. That means multiple choice questions or knowledge questionnaires. And if not, if you only can get reactions, participants' reactions, which is the very first outcome level, we ask them in your discussions, you clearly discuss the limitations of your evaluation and what would be your next step to further the evaluation of your program. So as you see, the last 3 items that I'm listing here is basically developing what are our future research steps, right? And we said that future research steps should explore the transferability of doctrine to the full range of educational and innovations and to other journals, which is basically that are published in educational innovations, which is what Alice was referring to. We still think that it may help guide peer reviewers and editors to provide focused feedback And mentors and educators could use it to coach early career faculty regarding the key components for designing, implementing, evaluating, and reporting curricular innovations. So, any questions? And I think this, Wendy added this.
Wendy, do you want to go over yours?
Yeah, I'll go over mine and then open up for discussion. So these are the bibliometrics of the article we discussed today. The data was pulled through Altmetric, which looks at alternative metrics. And so this is just a geographical breakdown of, this is actually focusing mainly on the tweeters. There were 46 tweeters that produced 63 tweets in all with an upper bound of over 125,000 followers, which means that the tweets that have been generated reached over 125,000 followers for them to view. I thought it was interesting with this today's data because the distribution of different countries is a lot wider than what I'm typically exposed to, I guess, with previous articles. Mostly it's very North America centric or Canada centric, but it seemed to kind of reach out past that, which is great. Another thing to highlight is the number of readers from Mendeley. So Mendeley is a citation management software, in addition to kind of having social media type of aspects to it. And there's been at least one study that indicated that the number of articles saved in a Mendeley library is more conducive to that particular article being cited back into another article. So there were 17 readers who've saved this particular article into their library. And so if you take a look at this whole data set, I think it's really interesting once again, because it's a little more wide ranging in terms of exposure and a higher number of Mendeley users saving the article.
So you're saying Australia down here only had one, right?
Yeah, so right now it's set to 1. There were 15 unknowns, so 15 people didn't indicate where they're from. And the highest being the United States, which is typically the case. But we rarely get anything from other countries such as Mexico, Indonesia, and Peru. So I thought that was interesting.
I think Deborah has a great question too. There are other innovation sections in other journals. Will this be applied in out of academic medicine?
So I think, the fact that, was published in academic medicine, of course, I think was brought to the attention to all to other editors. Academic medicine is well known because is well aware of this instrument because, well, they publish it, but also MedPortal and Academic Medicine both sort of the editors, the editorial team sort of met regularly. We even sometimes have meeting between the two journals too, because as you know, they're both sponsored by the AMC. So the issue is that I think we need to go back and do the pilot with the other submissions and see whether or not we need to tweak it for all types of innovations. Which is a concern that actually came out during the review of academic medicine. And that's why we clarified this is for curriculum innovations, because all the publications that we look into were curriculum related, which is sort of where, MedPortal, a lot of the publications are really curriculum innovations.
Right, but the articles are not necessarily curriculum innovations.
No, exactly. That's why we need to, I think probably what will happen is we'll either have a second iteration of the guidelines really to make them more inclusive, because I think that's, if you look at the guidelines, I think a few items are really very curriculum specific. So, we will have to probably come up with an iteration for others. Nonetheless, with that said, faculty developers and, educational scholars can still use it to guide junior faculty.
And that's the key, everybody, how to guide people to do the best iteration of their paper. Just go to the next slide when you can, Maria, for me.
Yes, and then, this.
Right. So because Maria, getting rejected, this is what I'm finding with young faculty. When you get rejected, and I'm working with medical students on papers as well, it is so devastating. And then I said, okay, we need to submit it to another journal. We need to rewrite it. And people just don't have the stamina to keep doing that. I just worked on an article that finally got published, third journal with students, and the amount, what it took to get them to go forward, so I think this idea of guidelines is helpful, that we do it better the first time.
Yes, well, and so that's why, that's what I suggest, that you really, because if anything, what we want, Elizabeth, I know you have a question. What also we want is to bring the field attention to the reporting guidelines in general. So at least if after this talk, you now go to the equator and try to look reporting guidelines associated with your study design. There's one on qualitative research too, and it's really more quality focused too. We do have criteria that also were sort of published by Harris and, Bridget O'Brien on criteria for reporting qualitative research. So I would suggest that you look for those, whatever type of research you're trying to write up and submit. That already will help you and put you on the right sort of side. Of course, when you publish, you need to get used to be rejected, and that's the norm, that. At least I think what I'm looking for is feedback, at least to get feedback. What I don't like is when I get the rejection right from the editor and I'm like, oh, I'm stuck, right? So at least feedback, that will help me move forward. Elizabeth.
So just very fast to the end, it seems really important when we mentor faculty or students to make sure we use that at the beginning when we design the study, because after the fact, it's way too late. Now, one question though, so let's say you publish a workshop or a focus group or something else, and you do the best you can, but you will not be able to satisfy all the criteria. Should we then best reach out to the editor and let him know, or how should we best leverage that?
That's a great question, and I'm glad you brought that. This is the thing about, and in fact, if anything, I said that. What I love about the Meta Portal submissions is that we really work with the authors. We have on the website, we have an author center where you will find, I'm pretty sure that now the doctrine is published, right?
Okay.
These guidelines, but we have other guidelines too, because if anything, we have been trying to create and help the authors with this forever. So I can say with confidence that in Meta Portal, you reach out to Sarah Hunt, who is the sort of administrator of the director of the staff, with any questions that you might have on your submission. And they are very responsive. They look into me as an ask. In fact, moreover, what I would suggest for the Meta Portal, you reach out to the mentors. There's a network of mentors. Alice is one. We look at the submission. We even look at the manuscript, and we help the authors in any way we can. But with the same principle, yes, I would suggest that you always contact the editors. I think they always welcome the authors, because, whatever helps to save your time and their time should be welcome, right?
Thank you.
Yes. I think a good journal is always going to be open. Some journals are a little bit more.
I'm going to have to say goodbye to my dear colleague. Elizabeth's going to close this out. But if anybody has any last questions, fill out the evaluation and note next month. It's a very special talk. So I hope to see as many of you as possible. And Marie, I'll talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Really informative.
Good luck.
Amazing how research. I think what's fascinating, we always talk about doing research, but this is like research on research, like it's like a double layer of research to do something like this. So I really congratulate you and your team. Amazing.
Thank you. Good night. Take care, okay?
Now, Alice, before you disappear, can you please place the SurveyMonkey, because I do not have it.
No, you don't have to place it. They're going to get an email from Barbara Sachs.
All right, fantastic.
They get an email from
Barbara. Thank you, Alan. Hopefully it was clear. I know I ran a little bit, so if there's any questions that you might want to ask me, even if you want about Meta Portal 2 or publications, I'm happy to. No problem.
Thank you very much. We will, and I have to say from my side, I had a very good experience when I wrote my only submission. It was very educational, and your team is fantastic, I have to say. There were so many questions. The turnaround was really super fast. So I can really recommend collaborating with MEDED Portal. It's fantastic.
Well, I mean, if you're ready to get crazy, right? Because I have to say, we sort of chase the authors, we sort of tell too much, we might gap you. Once you start in the reviewing processes, because we see potential, and we are going to be squeezing you until, until we get it done. But, it's basically, it happened, and it takes 7 months on average to publish on MEDED Portal, which is not that bad considered.
Yeah.
We keep the statistics, and we associated are in travel. If we have, if we have a submission in our queue for a long time, we just so yeah, that's a good thing. But yeah, we definitely are here to help you, and we want you to succeed. So, and for the other journals, every journal, but it has become very hard to really publish in medical education. So at least I tell my faculty let's try to get to feedback.
That is very true.
Yeah. If we get to feedback, let's pat our shoulders, is good, and then we see, right? And then you do your journal list, right? From the top. Sometimes that the top is not gonna, because to read academic medicine, it has to be something completely, really sort of very high end. So, but you do your journal list, and then you keep sort of basically using all this. You go down the list.
Yeah, this is a very good advice. So basically, you need to get the rejections to make it better and better, and it's not pleasant. But we have all been there. But this is the way to get to really great writing, and also to get really great feedback, which is important. Yeah. So we know what we're doing.
Yeah, and you first get your feedback inside, like peers. Peers don't have it. But this is what these reporting guidelines actually come so handy. Because if you look at the reporting guidelines, you know exactly what you address. And I'm that kind of a person, so, and now I'm going to tell you, it all starts with your proposal. There's nothing like writing a good research proposal or educational planning, syllabus, or, curriculum, right? If you get the write-up right straight from the get-go, then you have the manuscript right there from the get-go, even before you intervene.
It's ideal. That's so true. It's ideal.
But that's how we should be. The problem in medical should be backwards. And then we try to recompose things, and that's where still.
Right, and then we fix it, and that's difficult. Yeah. All right. In the interest of time, Maria, thank you so much. This was so eye-opening and elucidating, and I'm pretty sure that everybody's going to shower you with a lot of questions. I mean, I can just recommend that. Thank you, everybody. This was fantastic.
If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. My email, I think it's on my slides. It's maria.blanco@TAF, my institution, .edu. It's pretty easy.
Maria, I want to tell you something before you log off.
Yes.
Sure.
So a group of us were in a national group for the Academic Alliance in Internal Medicine for faculty development, and Grace was in my small group. And so there's a couple, so we had worked with Grace, and there's like 4 of us actually, just, because you do faculty development, associate editor for MEDED Portal. There's 4 of us that are doing actually a review of MEDED Portal, actually. Of faculty development submissions to MEDED Portal since the inception of MEDED Portal, actually, like kind of dissected down by theme to MEDED Portal. So you'll find interest in that, I think.
That is great, Karen, because yes, well, first of all, I'm an editor together with Kathy Kruger. So we are 2 as the editor for faculty development, because it's pretty, we do have submissions. That's great what you're doing. I know that Grace is involved in so many projects, but I know we needed something like that. So I'm looking.
Yeah, I mean, she's not involved in the project per se. She's given us permission to do the project because obviously, it's specifically a review of MEDED Portal.
But that's great, because I always push for a collection on faculty development. So let's see what you find out.
I think it's gonna mostly, well, obviously there's a lot more faculty development since the inception in 2005, but it's also going to highlight where in the themes of faculty development you know, there's room to ask for more submissions.
Oh, that's great. That is
So-
great. And that will also help us tremendous because, you know, one of the things that we determine before sending out for review is whether it really represents a what we call unique niche, right?
Exactly. Right.
Because, for example, if you send me a submission of resident as teacher, I'm going to tell you we have a lot.
You're like, no, thanks.
I mean, unless you really address something that none of the submissions today still address.
Having it. No, I agree with you.
So that exactly is great. So if you do that rigorous inventory, as an associate editor, I'm going to keep that in my list. And then when a submission comes in, I say, just you know what I mean? I'm going to keep checking. That's great.
Yeah.
That would be great. So thank you for that. Karen. You keep me
All right, everybody. So I have to leave and I cannot make
Thank you.
Karen Friedman host. I check it up to keep the discussion going.
All
It's
right.
really
That was it. That's all I had to say. Everybody go back to the day job.
Thank you so much, Maria. We'll be in touch.
Thank you.
This is very
Definitely.
valuable. And it's
Thank
always great to see everyone and to work with you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much for
Have a lovely day. It's fantastic.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.